I'm the Chief Data Officer for the city, and really what I'm going to try to talk about is our initiatives with trying to use data to drive engagement with citizens. So initially our goal was to try to, and this is kind of a cutesy way of that our city manager kept telling me what he really wanted, which was to answer the questions that we don't know to ask yet. And that kind of got us really rolling down this path of trying to aggregate data and understand what's going on in our city. But ultimately, it led us to this goal of just being able to have data drive the conversation within staff, within council meetings, or even just with the public. It's a lot easier to debate issues when you know what the facts are and what the data is actually showing you, rather than using conjecture or intuition, which sometimes might be right, but not always. So we came up with this kind of trifecta that's taken us a few years to deploy, and I'll step through each one of these things. Essentially, it started off with what I affectionately call Project Octopus. So if there's anybody in here that's really into the superhero movies that are out right now, when I say Project Octopus, I always think of Hydra and this kind of menacing type of thing. But it's really just an internal effort that we had to try to reach our tentacles from our GIS into all the different aspects of the city government. So every database that we could get our hands into and start pulling that data out of there. And we'll get more into that in a second. And then the second phase was to then put a kind of a cool dating profile, if you will, of all of our data online for staff and the public to use in our open data portal, similar to what Sandy Springs has, and East Point as well. And we call that the Data Hub. And then the last component is developing a custom Alexa skill that's been pretty successful so far. But the thing, before I really get into these things individually, to keep in mind is that these are not static types of projects that we did once and then they're just sitting up there and getting stale. These are constantly evolving, very dynamic types of projects. So as I mentioned, Project Octopus was all about trying to get our feelers into different systems, liberate data, identify the key staff that are kind of the gatekeepers of those different types of data. It's very, very unusual for an IT staff or a GIS staff to be able to be experts in every different aspect of the city government. So it made a lot more sense for us to reach out to the local experts in the planning department and the local experts in public works and leverage them to tell us, hey, what's most important to you? What are the pieces of a work order that you really care about? Do you care about when it happened and where it happened? Probably. But do you care about all these other types of things that might be attached to those things that help you track things internally, but might not mean much to a council or a decision maker or something like that? And really, as I mentioned, it's a matter of trying to get all of the data that people are generating by just doing what they do with the city. So when they file a building permit, they're creating data. They don't realize it, but that's what they're doing. And all of these types of different interactions, whether it's a 911 call or some other kind of permit or license, those are all going into these little silos throughout your organization, whether you realize it or not, and they're just sitting there waiting to be untapped. And so, again, what we did through the help of a lot of staff was figure out where those really important pieces of information were, liberate them, and pull them into the GIS as that main point of aggregation. The second phase, as I mentioned, was developing the Data Hub. We did this using some Esri technology. Esri, for those of you that don't know, is kind of the Microsoft of the mapping world. There are others out there, but they've been doing it the longest and kind of the best. And so they have this very kind of WYSIWYG interface where you build a website, basically. And ours has a global search, much like other people's does. And then we go into very task-specific pages, we call them, for each department that have all kinds of dashboards and things inside of there to try to create understanding. So it's not just about, hey, here's a bunch of data, citizen. It's, here's a bunch of data, this is what it means, or this is what it could mean to you. This is how it impacts you. How that's actually made is through, as I mentioned, some drag and drop kind of interfaces, as well as technology that Esri has called Operations Dashboard. If you work for a city or you live in a city that doesn't have dashboards and you know that they're using some kind of Esri technology, go back and say, why aren't we using this? There's also a lot of other open source kinds of projects that Esri and others are developing, like Cedar, that allow you to not build a full dashboard, but just something that's a little bit more lightweight and interactive that, again, can kind of try to drive some understanding of what's going on with the data. And then the third part here, is really trying to leverage all of that data and funnel it into platforms that we know people are already using. Sandy Springs has been really good about using, Waze as a platform to kind of, get information that they're collecting out to the public. Some other cities like us have done that as well. But with our open data portal in particular, we really thought that building a custom Alexa skill to liberate that data and make it even easier to use was pretty key. So for those of you that don't know, Alexa is kind of this AI in the cloud that lets you play music and send text messages and buy things from Amazon, of course, because that's what they want you to do. Jeff Bezos isn't rich enough. We need to support him. He's not doing too well in the stock market lately. It'll also change your lights, turn things on and off, and but what it doesn't do is look up very specific pieces of information without us building a custom skill to make it a little bit smarter. And so some of the things that you can ask our skill are, what is the zoning of a certain property? How many police calls have happened within half a mile of my house? And even things that are on the calendar or jobs that are open at the city. So it's a matter of trying to help people not have to do Google searches or navigate complex types of websites or dashboards even, and just let them ask questions the way they normally would if they were calling somebody at City Hall. Something interesting that we've found with this is that a lot of our staff have slowed down on their use of our GIS applications and are starting to use the Alexa skill even more, which is great that they're using these things, but we're like, wait, this is really for the public. So, and then in terms of how the skill is actually built, it's really pretty simple. So the skill itself lives in AWS. That's kind of Amazon's cloud. And it leverages their Alexa platform, which is all of the brains of converting what somebody says to some kind of text that a machine can read. And then from the bottom side, we found a open source project called Project Sonar that Esri had built that is supposed to build chatbots and connect back into our data hub. So it's kind of the glue, if you will, that connects our GIS and all of our open data to an Alexa that can then, figure out what somebody means, figure out which data set to go and query, pull the data, translate that into something that a human can understand, and then verbalize it to the user. So the entire experience is one that is supposed to be very quick, very transactional, not, you call the city and then you get transferred to 16 different people and, maybe you get in front of the right person or they're out at lunch or, that's the kind of experience we don't want people to have. And instead, what we're trying to do is, like I said, surface that data and make it even more accessible. One of the campy kind of ways that we describe that is democratizing data. So trying to use as many tech terms as we can just to make ourselves feel really cool. But that's really what it is. It's a matter of trying to meet people where they are on the platforms that they're already using. Then, of course, the million-dollar question that everybody wants to know is how much and how long. So in terms of the different phases of the project overall, our little trifecta, as I like to call it, Project Octopus didn't cost us anything except just staff time. We'll get into the time in the next slide. But essentially what we did is we just used our GIS staff, of which I'm one, and the relationships we already had with different departments to go out and kind of evangelize this whole concept of liberating data and making it more useful to people both in staff and decision makers like Kimberly and folks like that. And then the second part of it, doing the data hub, again, that didn't cost us anything. We're already Esri consumers, or customers rather. The technology that we leveraged to build that interface was already included in our yearly licensing fee. So instead of going out and buying a Socrata or getting some kind of super open source thing like CCAN, that is free, but you really need to know your stuff before you start to get into that kind of a project. We just leveraged what we already had. And then the Alexa skill is the only part of it that really cost us some money. So initially buying one of the smart speakers was about $100, not a big deal. But to get the project off the ground, we needed to contract with Esri for a limited amount of time to have one of their developers on staff kind of help us build the skeleton, and then once we had that, we kind of took it and ran with it. And then in terms of level of effort, if we kind of were to, this is a little bit more difficult for us to estimate because, as most of you are aware, and most of you do in your work lives, we're juggling multiple different projects all at the same time. So we guesstimated that we probably spent about 80 hours trying to evangelize, this whole concept with other departments and figure out the SQL and all these internal processes to grab data. We didn't need anybody to help us do that, from a custom developer standpoint. The Data Hub was a little bit more intensive. It was about 120 hours, so 3 weeks solid of just kind of building the initial framework, kind of fleshing out this is what we want it to look like, customizing it so that it looked more like our city website, so that if you're a citizen and you're at the city's website and you click on a link and it bounces you out to this other page, we wanted it to feel and look as much like the original place that you were at, not like, oh my goodness, where am I now? Is this some other city or what have you? And then the Alexa skill in terms of our internal hours was about 120 hours just to get the initial 200 different questions built in. As I mentioned, there's quite a bit of work that went into that from the developer side also. But in terms of 80 hours for 10 grand, that was about $125 an hour, $150 an hour. I'm not so good at doing math on my feet. It was somewhere between those. In either case, if you were to go out with another kind of vendor or something, it would probably cost 2 or 3 times that. So again, it's not a monumental level of effort. It's just something that you need to commit to and kind of, have the executive backup, to say, yes, this is something we want. We're willing to put the resources behind you. And then the question that we always kind of get back to is why? It's great to be transparent and all this stuff, and it's kind of the year 2000 Gov 2.0 type of stuff that people are advocating this kind of thing for. But really, for us, it's kind of about the convergence of transparency of what you're doing with driving understanding within the citizen. That's where you're able to get that trust, that buy-in. People aren't going to engage with you if you're not, if they can't trust you, or if they don't trust what they're seeing online. And this is something that we've really tried to push hard to accomplish. So I know it's an extremely fast way of breaking all of that stuff down. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Sure.
On the Alexa thing, I see that you came up with 200 questions. Do you have a way of capturing if someone asks a question that wasn't part of your 200 to know that that's something you might want to add?
Absolutely, yeah. So in the analytics of the skill, we were able to go in and see what types of questions people are asking, how often, when, but then we're also able to see in the logs ones where they've asked a question and it's failed, or they've gotten some really funky, they've asked about stormwater and they get something about, Fulton Water and Sewer or something, some kind of issue like that. But of the 200 questions, to be a little bit more transparent on that, 50 of those are tied into open data. The other 150-ish are all FAQs that we've encountered through either frontline staff telling us these are things people are asking. So hopefully that kind of puts it a little bit in perspective. Yeah.
Have you thought about including artificial intelligence?
I'm sorry?
Have you thought about including artificial intelligence whether the
Yeah, that's one of the things that we're looking into, and it's a matter of bandwidth. We're a smaller city, so we obviously don't have the level of expertise to do that kind of stuff. But yeah, if you know of any contractors out there that are exploring that type of stuff, we'd be more than happy to talk to them. So that's it. Thank you.